Welcome to On the Soul's Terms podcast, and today, exploring at a deeper level the fifth house, I'm joined with a dear friend, Vive Oldham. Vive is a somatic educator, a body dreaming facilitator, and curator of conversations that help people rediscover what brings them to life. With a background in the arts and a career spanning large-scale events to intimate therapeutic spaces, her work is rooted in her belief that the body has a natural intelligence, one that can guide us towards capacity, creativity, and connection when we have the capacity to listen. Her course, Everyday Rebellion, introduces women to gift habits, gentle nervous system informed practices that help you discover what really brings you to life without bypassing complexity. As the creator of the global summit Pleasure as a Revolutionary Act, she brings together diverse voices to explore the many textures of pleasure, beyond indulgence and interconnection and joy. Vive's work bridges the therapeutic and the creative. It's not about perfection or fixing ourselves, but about coming home to the body and the imagination as a source of knowing. She brings presence, structure, and a fierce tenderness to everything she facilitates, from one-to-one sessions and courses to community events. Her deepest delight is witnessing the moment someone recognizes their own aliveness again. And that's Vive. I've known her for over 20 years. She's a dear friend. I wanted her to come on to discuss the fifth house because, as you can hear in her bio there, so much of her life revolves around fifth house themes like joy and pleasure and play and creativity, all of these things. And it's also a wonderful coincidence that she joins me for today because today is my 100th episode and she's here to also celebrate that landmark and that milestone. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you listening for the support over the years that the show's been going and for seeing us through to this point. All of the support and the listens have been deeply appreciated, so thank you all. And now we move on to my conversation with Vive Oldham. So I wonder if you could talk to us about what creativity and pleasure mean to you to start with.
Ooh, yeah. Well, pleasure and creativity for me are inherently linked. I think both things need like a level of relaxation or a level of openness, like heart opening, for it to be experienced. And I say that, and I think immediately of something that Michael Mead said recently in his interview that I did for the summit around that pleasure isn't just about the good things. In fact, pleasure actually is like at its most essential level, a deep feeling, like a deep expression and feeling and sense of connection, or it is connection. That's certainly how my interest in it was sparked. So, if I was to kind of go back 5 years, where that's sort of where the 5-year mark is kind of where I see this whole thing kind of began, which was I had moved to the country. I'd been quite burnt out in the job that I was in. And I moved to the country and I had this idealized idea of what that would be like. And yet there I was, still me, with all the same problems. And I was finding it really, really, really hard to disentangle myself from the way of being that I was in when I was in the city. And that was like highly stressed, really on the go, kind of almost grinding my way through life. And I just have this the memory that always comes to me is sitting on the veranda with my kids, and it's sort of the sunshine. We were looking out at the bush, and I'm thinking, I need to find something to do with the girls that I also really want to do, like a way of delighting with them, doing something that also delights me. And they had all their textures everywhere, and we had chalk, and it was on like a concrete veranda. And so I was like, let's all just draw. Let's draw. So I picked up their textures and we all started sort of drawing together. And the beautiful thing about drawing with kids is most, and especially if it's sort of like the 5 and under age bracket, most of the time they're not they're not self-conscious yet of what they're doing. So they're so instinctive in the way that they are drawing, and everything that my kids would draw would delight me. And so I kind of almost took their lead in the drawing. And so I started to draw with them and realized, wow, like an hour went past and I felt more relaxed, more enlivened as well. Like it's not just that sort of I'm going to try and steer away from kind of regulation, but it's like that whole deep sort of rest that you feel, but also enlivened by the play. And that was really interesting to me. And sort of as a consequence, it spun off this my own little art practice where I was like, I'm going to draw every night for 5 minutes when the girls go to bed. And I would notice, and then that sort of segued into painting. And I would notice every time I did that, my whole body felt like I could be exhausted and lying like almost asleep on the floor, putting them to bed. And then I'd go and do that 5 minutes, even if it was a bit of a slog to kind of get myself into it. I tried to keep it really, really simple. My whole physiology would change. And I was like, what is going on? Like, what is actually happening? And I think that was like the first little seed of this sense, perhaps that I knew very early in life as a very creative kid, a kid that used to sing in her cot all the time. I remember I always had some kind of creative project going on in the garage, much, I'm sure, to my parents' kind of like frustration and pain because stuff was just always in a mess. So like it was so interesting. It was like rekindling something that maybe had been there like once before then as a little girl. And also perhaps through my teen years when I was really heavily into theatre and drama and that kind of thing. And then now kind of in this completely different phase of life as a mother, and also sort of transitioning out of a career into a curiosity about what next. So the art practice really kind of like woke something up in me that I was like, whoa. And I think that was when I first understood, without intellectually understanding it, the absolute essential nature of pleasure and creativity, which sort of led me then through a series of discoveries into Marion Woodman's work, into then Marion Dunleady's work with body dreaming, which is the practice that I do now with clients, and then into the summit, because in body dreaming, pleasure is that orienting to something that brings pleasure. And now I have this greater understanding about that brings connection, is almost like a counterpoint that we use in body dreaming when there's also something that is activating, and we use it to kind of hold the tension so that a third way may arise. And so I had this kind of fascination. I had this sensation of pleasure in my own body through doing these creative things. And then I was learning about this idea of orienting to things that are pleasurable as a way to help the nervous system essentially titrate, or maybe a word that would be more understandable, temper a charge that's going through it. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then there was this other realization. Pleasure is really, in the culture that I was raised in, certainly not something that was necessarily encouraged in a number of ways. And I'm like, why? Since when? Why? So, this, I guess this opened up a line of inquiry for me that I really wanted to pursue with the summit, because I had sort of like a sense that pleasure was essential, but I wanted to speak to lots of people about it.
A lot of things kind of like are coming up for me as you're speaking about it. You said necessarily, but I would say even like that pleasure isn't necessary in the culture. You know what I mean? Like it's a like, yeah, I mean, a little bit, yeah, sure. Or it becomes shadow, or it becomes repressed, or it comes out in ways that are often quite destructive or secretive or locked away somewhere. This is kind of like what I was drawn into, because if the culture is, it feels to me like it's a bit of an industrial revolution hangover, you know, like it's got like elements of religiousness in it and elements of industry in it. And it's just sort of where the culture is fed back to us what's necessary and what's not necessary, you know, like what's just a little bonus. Yeah, like you can get a little bit of pleasure, but better to be kind of like on the mill, right, working. And yes.
And to add to that, and as a consequence of that, pleasure is something you have to buy. Pleasure is something you go to that's outside of you, that you need to kind of then somehow consume. The idea of pleasure, and this is what I discovered chatting to Shamali Gad recently, is and Michael, is, you know, pleasure is always there in the field.
Yeah.
But you know, it's that we have been encouraged to be almost disconnected to it. And once again, there's this sense that you need to go out and get it.
Yeah.
That it's not always available to you, which creates some idea of a barrier around your access to pleasure.
And it's so interesting because just before getting online, you know, I was just listening back to the conversation I had with Brian Clark, and his wife Glenys also wrote an article about this, but the Beatles song She's Leaving Home, and this line in it that is fun is the one thing that money can't buy. And of course it's not true, because fun is a commodity, right? Like it's highly commodified actually, and it is like, it's almost like it's stripped from us and sold back to us in a form that will never really satisfy or satiate, or it will never satisfy or satiate in the way that when you're sitting with your children on the porch and you're looking out at the bush and you just start drawing. That's ultimately a free act in a sense, besides having to get the crayons and the things and the materials. But ultimately, like the moments and the time you spend there is free, and the same with your 5 minutes at the end of the day is free. And that's kind of the beauty of it, isn't it? I mean, that's kind of the thing where you're actually leaving behind the commodified world and you're entering into another world. It does feel a bit like entering into another realm as well, doesn't it? Because it does become timeless in there. We do lose sense of time, like you mentioned, the hour went by in a blast or something, in a flash, and then also you felt that regeneration happening. You know, it makes me think of like recreation and recreation, and that sort of little play on words that we're creating again. We're regenerating just by being in the sheer enjoyment of the thing that we're doing. Which does feel like it's opposed to that thing where we're just grinding and just doing the thing that we have to do or must do.
I would add to that, it's the ability to have the spontaneity to step into the experience. Like there's a presence that's like not even requiring a heap of intentionality around it. It's that, and the pleasure comes almost in the spontaneity of it. In just being kind of open, like we were talking about before we jumped on, like that. There's a pleasure in being open to what is and what is happening, and in really rigid, scheduled lives that are how we were doing our survival dance in the culture. There's less and less space for that.
Right.
Or there seems to be.
Or if you're trying to get your recreation, you're often sort of going with some low-hanging fruit, right? Like you're hitting Netflix or you're doing the things that the culture sort of offers you for a price.
That's not asking yeah, and sometimes that's needed. Like, I understand.
Yeah.
I don't want to shame anyone for binge watching Netflix, but there is a different felt sense when you are creating and bringing out what's inside. And I think that then is a parallel with self-expression and creative expression. Like you said, there's a generative nature to the energy that comes when we have we're welcomed to be expressing. It's a like a life-giving, enlivening energy that comes with that I certainly haven't really experienced, say, watching Netflix. It's sort of asking for your participation, and you're being engaged.
Yeah.
And also you get to just bring something from within out, and there's a joy in that, whatever that thing is that comes out.
Yeah. I'm just reminded of a moment, just sprung back to mind, a memory I haven't had for a long time, actually. But when I was directing a Unicamp for Kids camp, so this is in Western Australia, where Vive and I are both from, there was a really beautiful kind of uni club that would take away underprivileged kids, like 120 of them, and into camping, and sort of like all the uni students got to play mum and dads and things like that. And it was very fun. And I got invited back in 2005 to direct one of these. And I spent most of the time like dancing and singing and just mucking around, even as the director. Like, someone asked me, I'm not sure if it was a kid or a uni student, adult, asked me, like, why are you wasting your energy with all that dancing? And I said, no, I'm not wasting energy, I'm creating energy. And it was a very spontaneous response, and it was very true, because actually it was like more and more creation of energy by being in the delight of kind of like that moment in my life, and enjoying, like, knowing in a sense, like this 1 week event that I'm in is opening and will close, and I really want to make the most of it by singing and dancing and having a lot of fun during it, and being in that sense of an endless sort of source of creation while we're doing this, So that idea that, because I was thinking about that, because sometimes, as you'd mentioned, like, you can be exhausted and therefore think, I just need to sleep, which may be the right thing to do. But also what can happen is, like, in your exhaustion, engaging with something that enlivens you may sort of like blast away all the cobwebs and all the stuff, and bring you back to life, essentially rebirth you into the moment. And that could be it. That could be all you really needed to do. Like, for you, 5 minutes of painting. For me, it might be, writing or just seeing if I can do a ditty or a poem, like a little beat poetry or something. And then suddenly you feel the creative force inside of you, what I would call eros in its like most pure form, which is just the creative life force, and letting that come through and out, and then suddenly feeling enlivened again, suddenly not needing all that, like you're back,
You make me think of two things. One of them is something that Kimberly Ann Johnson said in one of her classes that I did, and I was like, whoa. She said, sometimes you might think you're exhausted, but actually it's lethargy. And when I heard that, this difference of exhaustion versus lethargy, like physical exhaustion versus lethargy or boredom, and how it has a similar sense in the body. But when you're exhausted, of course, the answer is to rest. When you're lethargic, that's where what I've spoken to, where you tap into that thing. It's like, oh no, it wasn't that you needed to rest, actually. And that thing that brings that energy through, you just needed to come through a different channel. You just needed the shift by engaging with that. And it's like, wow.
Yes,
because
it's very true.
I loved that. Now I can't think of the second thing, because that's how my brain works.
That second one will come back later. But I think about lethargy because it comes from the word lethe, which is the river of forgetfulness in the underworld. So the words like lethal and lethargic come from that place, right? It's sort of like a forgetful place. And the other river in the underworld is mnemosyne, which is like memory or remembering, and bringing you back. So like one of these rivers will sort of take you into the lethargic, and one of these rivers will bring you back into the remembering. And I wonder if also that element of creating and remembering is part of the same channel as well. Like there's something that can come through, right? Like when you open your channels or open your, I guess it's sort of like an opening of the heart or the cells, or maybe opening back into the enjoyment of being alive. And then suddenly the things that come through help you remember better in a way. And maybe we follow, it's something within craniosacral as well that I've thought of, because, cranio really is so yin, it's so on the other side of this. So it really takes you into the deep rest. And then down in that place, there can be you can find what's called primary respiration. Like you find the first breath again and everything comes back to life, but you've gone down in a sense, where you've just gone into some really, really deep restful place. But something that can get in the way is stagnancy in the system or lethargy in the system, where it can be like something's got to happen around that. And the difference between the exhaustion of needing to go down into that place and the lethargy, where if you go into more rest, you may just create more lethargy. And it's such an odd nuance, really. It's like hard to know what's really needed, apart from like a deep intuitive sense of whether one needs to go down or up, in a sense. Like up regulating and down regulating is the conversation there within these forms of body work.
Yes. And then the kind of patterns that you tend to, or the positions you tend to inhabit, just because that's the position that you're most kind of, the body is most familiar with, because I don't think it's a conscious thing. And then practicing being in a different place is the way that Kimberly often says it. And and probably with, from a body dreaming lens, we use the CYBAM model. So that's sensation, image, behavior or movement, affect, emotion, and meaning or thought. It's knowing in those moments of lethargy, that, and certainly, that if you could just, if I'm feeling really tired, if I was to sort of start to tap into sensation in my body, that might then take me somewhere like, oh, okay, I can feel like real, like a heaviness of my eyes. And then that might take me into a movement that I want to do. And suddenly when I'm moving through those channels, that's like another way, which in its own way is a creative expression of whatever it is the body is wanting to do to bring it wherever it wants to go, essentially. But I notice that's sort of how we get stuck into that lethargy, is that we don't have the basics of like knowing to move around the channels. We kind of get stuck probably in the thought channel and this sense of that the body is tired, and then we just go to, or the other thought I had was around a rigidity. Like rigidity actually I think can bring lethargy. And so when you were talking about the Unicamp for Kids stuff and that beautiful playfulness with the dancing that you had, one of the things that was really interesting that I noted when I became a mother was actually, I had to learn how to play again, because I found it really hard to relax into play with the kids. And it's amazing how play is so generative.
Yeah.
But there was almost like I had to relearn that. And it was really confronting, because the invitations were there again and again and again to play.
Yeah.
But the rigidity in me almost was closed off. And, like you were saying about that opening, being open.
Yeah.
If we're open to the field, if we're open to the invitations that the world or the children around us or the people around us are, where they're inviting us to dance, then there's a pleasure almost in just being alive. And that, I think, is where we've maybe lost the way a little bit.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking about this because this is also perfectly fifth house, which is why, I knew that it was good to talk to you about the fifth, even though you're not in the realm of astrology, yet everything we discuss is around the fifth. And one of the things here is children. It is the house of children. It's the house of so it can be like literally your children, but also your creations in the fifth. And just when you were talking then about that sort of dichotomy between the closed down, like I can't play, I don't want it, the rigidity, and the playfulness, the invitation to play is constantly coming, and you kept constantly kind of declining the invitation in a way, like no play for me. It's the old idea of the Latin was the puer aeternus, which is the eternal youth, and the senex, which is the crusty old man, essentially. And you can also do puella and crone. Like, you can do it anyway, really. Like, the puer is the boy, the eternal boy, and the puella is the eternal girl. The senex is the crusty old man. And the crone or crone-like figure is probably a better word for it that I'm not reaching for or don't know, of the crusty old woman, rather than the crone can be the wiser woman. I mean, senex can too, but really we're talking about the rigidity of the old self and the liveliness of the young self. And that's one of these archetypal oppositions that goes through. And I wonder if the fifth actually points to that in a sense, especially when we have children, or even with our creations, right? So we can be a bit like Saturn swallowing our children because we don't want them to see the light of day, or we're maybe ashamed, or we're maybe kind of like, I don't want this to be a reflection on me, or I want this standing in the world, or something like that. Like, what will they think of me? Something rigid that comes over us, or even just like shame dynamics, or I cannot, or I'm not good at, or any of these kinds of ideas that belong in the realm of the senex.
Yeah, I would say even, and I think we were talking about this earlier, was I would notice, so with the drawing and the painting, I would get so frustrated if I tried to draw something and it didn't look like, I didn't have the skill to make it look the way that I wanted to look. And so I would go down this whole way of inquiry where I'd be like, well, what are the skills? I need to learn how to do portraiture. And so I'd watch like the shading things. And I'm not saying that there's anything bad about that, because actually mastery in that sense can be deeply pleasurable and satisfying. But what I noticed was every time I tried to do something with an outcome focus, the pleasure went. But if I was just letting myself take whatever color I wanted and slap it on, and then I would, then I had all of my art supplies, and like I'd have like these paint pens and acrylic paints and oil crayons and whatever it was, and I would just, those paintings, like some of them are my most favorite paintings of all and works of all time. And I might have even looked at them at the time and been like, oh yeah. And then I'll go back and be like, wow. And it doesn't look like anything. And I think this is why I love abstract painting so much, but it makes me feel something. And I'm like, well, that's the success. And not that we need to have success, but I suppose that's where the connection, the deep satisfaction, you were talking about all these things that are meant to bring us pleasure, but they kind of have this temporariness, or this lack of that deep satiety to them. And that made me think of when I first encountered Bill Plotkin's work, and we did with my friends, we did the Wild Mind. It was like a 5-day intensive, and it was in the early mornings, and there was a lot of dream work and a lot of active imagination. And one of the most remarkable things at being kind of immersed in that work, because active imagination to me is almost like it's that same idea of bringing this, and a lot of it for me was image, so bringing this inside out. I felt, I remember describing myself as feeling like so satiated, like that kind of deep base of the body satisfaction that kind of comes. And there was no, a lot of the kind of impulses to reach for chocolate or coffee or whatever I would have been filling myself with was really, it had really abated. And I thought, gosh, that's really interesting. It's so interesting to be so full. I felt so full through that. And that feels connected to what we're talking about with pleasure and creative expression, and especially the act of not just you getting to express it, but it being seen by others and delighted in with others, and people are curious about what it is that's coming up or being expressed. Like that, there's a pleasure in that as well.
So maybe what we're kind of getting at here, in a sense, archetypally, is the dance between pure and senex, in the sense that, like, it's not about giving yourself everything you've ever wanted all the time. It's also not about restricting yourself from everything you've ever wanted all the time, And there's something of the dance that happens in between all of this, I think, just sort of tapping into that as we're talking, as those archetypes could create that third thing. Because even when you're sitting down for 5 minutes a day to create, like that's a discipline, actually. You're using a certain amount of discipline in order to get to your play.
And I think that it really comes back to the definition of pleasure, and that pleasure has sort of almost been corralled into, like, pleasure being only the good things or feeling good. But the deeper I go into the exploration of it, like, pleasure can even be in grief. That's what both Shamali and Michael were talking to. And I had a feeling around it. And I chatted recently to my cousin, who for a long time has been the general manager of the hospice in Albany in Western Australia. And I'm going to talk to her for the summit about kind of pleasure in a presence of pleasure, an experience of pleasure, even at death. And, some of the things she described to me around what was happening in the sort of the ceremony and the celebration around death and what's been said and what's been experienced. It's like pleasure is not just good feelings. Yeah. Pleasure is feeling, is deep feeling and connection. And that applies to the full spectrum of emotion. And I think that's a really important, because when we cry from the absolute guts of ourselves and our heart is broken and torn open, there's a pleasure in that too.
Yeah.
And maybe I will be disagreed with, and I welcome that. But I think the heart opening, because it's connection, that's where the pleasure is. It's in the connection.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like, in Greek, the god Dionysus, which is another god that is largely misunderstood in the modern day, because it's considered to be kind of like openly orgies in the forest kind of thing, right? Like, which is, again, the modern mind has just not been able to bring forward archetypal realities into the present world, because it has a lot of struggle with that. And so it has to call things good and bad. And so, of course, Dionysus gets called just the, like, bad kind of thing. But the representation on the archetypal level is the agony and the ecstasy, right? So it's the movement in between, and I love that distinction, because it's like, yeah, can you find the pleasure? And I think this is where you mentioned titration, or or tempering, or whatever, however you want to see that, is to be able to bring. I guess this is where the nervous system does come in, doesn't it? Because the nervous system can be overloaded, or it can be starved, and it can be shut down. And it's just a matter of sometimes being honest with yourself around that, so that you can make your way back into being open to the spectrum of human experience.
Yes.
And there are things that happen to us that shut us down. Like I'm sure when you were working, as you say, in the city, but because I was a friend of yours in that time, it was like, it's so interesting because you were still in the fifth house in that you were in events, right? Which is a fifth house thing.
And music events.
And music events. So you're in the realm, you're around it, you're around things that you love. And you were working pretty much every moment of the day. I mean, I just felt like your mind was like at work all the time during those, like a long time as well, like a decade or so, right?
15 years.
15 years. Yeah. And to be around the people that are reveling and in pleasure and enjoying the music and the creatives and the artists and all the different artists you got to meet during that time. And it seems like that was where you wanted to be. And yet you were in, the shutdown in a sense, right? Like, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I would say there was a dissonance there that was going on. So it was a huge stretch, and the stretch was exhilarating at times, for sure. And there were moments of like, wow. Like I remember looking at Sting and Paul Simon on stage and being like, wow.
Yeah.
And that was also one of the hardest events that that was through this crazy period where I'd worked 10 weeks straight and I was absolutely exhausted. But I think what I remember, what I've written about reflecting back at that was that I was also so rigid that I didn't really enjoy it. I didn't have capacity.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of was what I was thinking as you were speaking about, the nervous system has its ways. It's so intelligent and clever that it has these ways of being like, okay, this is too much and now we're going to shut down or whatever the response is. It's going to do what it's going to do. And God bless it that it does that for us to be okay.
Yeah.
But what I started to understand as I've been doing body dreaming and studying Kimberly's work was I want to have more capacity to feel all the feelings so I don't so I get to be in my life more so I can be more spontaneous and so I have more of those moments of connection. And that's what felt so important is how do I grow capacity to feel more and more deeply so I don't continue to disengage when things are challenging. And I think that benefits me so much, even in terms of it means you don't shy away from life because life is challenging. It's just constantly full of unpredictable uncertainties. There's the greater world out there is completely heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to keep shutting down from that. So it was like, how do I, and this is sort of where I came back to pleasure as the resource for the capacity building. So essential. More than ever, maybe.
Yeah, it's such a intriguing point to just sort of feel into, to not take as a fundamental truth, but as to feel into that if it's true, to be, that is pleasure essential to the ability to draw together broken pieces and, to pull things together again, which is remembering. And it's interesting to feel that in that if we take that river of Lethe into that time, the tragedy is that as I feel it is like a lifetime can go by and you're not really in it. I think that's the tragedy that I feel of the potential of what could happen here is that so much shutdown happens in the system that, things still happen, good things, bad things. But in the protection from life, in the safety sort of place, because this is not a particularly safe place. This is why I really like this approach in a way, because we can be a bit safety oriented and yet creation is not safe, right? It's not safe in the way of cocooning is safe, or disappearing or moving away from is safe. And sometimes that's necessary too. I don't want to say that that's not. It's just a different realm. It's a different realm of experience that we're talking about. But fifth house, creative play, has an edge to it.
Absolutely. And innovation, creativity, it requires you to be like sidling up to those edges all the time and holding all these different positions in order for the interesting thing to emerge from that.
Yeah.
But it takes capacity to hold those different positions. It takes capacity to not necessarily be in control, or even though you are. That's kind of the irony. And it takes, certainly in my experience, one of the things that I found really interesting with body dreaming is noticing how when I'm taken into deep rest through one of the facilitators, I'm like, whoa, this is what deep rest feels like. I thought I was relaxed, but then realizing how, because I think that to an extent, creativity, I mean, and people may disagree with this, because sometimes limits are really amazing for creativity. Like I might limit myself to 4 different paints that I'm allowed to use, or 4 different colors. And that has a, but it's all about experimentation.
Yeah.
Being open to experiment. And there's a capacity that's required to sort of hold both that you're in control because you're creating something, and also you have no control.
Yeah. Limits is an interesting component of it, isn't it? Because I think that I can see how limits can be a really, really fun, playful element of it. And how you're given certain things to play with, but not other things to play with, and then within that, because I do think there's an element here in this house, or in this realm, where, for me at least, I'll just speak from my own experience, I can be swamped by the limitlessness of it, like the endless possibility, like the dreaded blank page, and just staring at it, going, I don't know, and then making a decision and going, no, that's not right. You have to kind of like make your way. In order to actually create, right? You have to choose this color, not that color. There is a sort of decision process that has to happen along the way. Yeah.
What you were saying about the cynics and the
puer.
And the puer.
Yeah.
It's the tension holding? I
think so. I think it might be about the tension between those two as a big, because often it's so elaborated on within Jungian circles, but you can get the feeling like somebody will land on one side or another, like Marie-Louise von France definitely landed on the cynic side, and like, how do we get these puers to stop being puers? And then Hillman retorted in a way by landing on the puer side and standing for the puer, so that the puer isn't getting crushed by the cynics. So it can get like, there's so many ways that those two archetypes can get split off from each other because they're so fiercely oppositional.
Well, you make me think about what we were talking about earlier before we jumped on together, which was, this also makes me think more of the body dreaming, which is like creating a fluidity in the system is part of the capacity building. And as soon as we take a position, it's saying we can't be all these other things. And like we were talking about with, I was talking to Chris about how I did a lot of theatre and drama as a teenager, and how essential that was, because I got to wear all these different hats. I got to be all these different people. I got to work with different archetypal energy. And that is part of that, I think, that fluidity in the system is like, it's okay, you can partner with all of that at different points.
Actually, it's a great segue into theatre and something that we were talking about before coming on air here, and how theatre, I was thinking about it as far as in the ancient world, a theatre was always a part of the healing. So the healing centers, the Asclepian centers, would have, like, it was like a hospital in a sense, but there was also a theatre there And there was also like Olympic-sized stadium as well, which is another side of this house in a way of like almost what can you do with all of this energy and health and vitality? What's the maximum that could be done? And you get people sort of showing off the discus or the wrestling or the running or that kind of thing, that side of it. But always the centerpiece of these places in some ways was the theatre. And it's made me really contemplate how theatre and drama and acting and medicine and health are part of the same thing in a way. There's so much healing to be done through play in that sense of playing out or playing these characters or playing archetypes. And then you can really elaborate on that side of yourself, can't you? I imagine. I haven't done a lot of it in my life. I wish I had, although I have done it in the capacity of like constellations and different sort of ways of doing it through the healing modalities. But to actually give yourself to a character and therefore amplify that side of yourself must be such a deep exploration.
That's an interesting way to say it. I don't know that I've ever considered it as a deep exploration. I think I maybe have experienced it as that, but without being super conscious that that is what is happening. But I am able to look back and think it's such a beautiful way to reach into your emotional experience and bring it out into the world in almost the safety of the character that you're playing, but with your own emotional landscape being vocalized.
Yeah. And then you can explore a different character. So, because you've just gotten back into some theatre, haven't you, with this current play? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Because I was having a lot of fun talking to you about it.
I would love to.
Yeah.
I would love to.
What are you up to there?
So, I am in a little regional town in Western Australia, and they have a repertory theatre club, maybe. It's funny that I don't even know that. And they've chosen a wonderful woman here who's actually a fellow mum, has chosen to do the musical Disenchanted. Now, it's not the Disney Disenchanted, because I believe that there is one of those. It's a Broadway musical, it's kind of along the same taste as, say, an Avenue Q. I don't know if you ever saw the Avenue Q.
No.
It's pretty subversive, and it's essentially a cabaret, and it's about really pissed off Disney princesses. Sort of the Disney princesses like 20 years later when they're like, what? And it has, the thing that I've loved so much about doing it, well, one is that I'm singing again. And I had a period of really not wanting to sing. And singing is another thing that brings energy back into my body, especially if I can just do it and enjoy it. But for me, singing came with so much self-criticism and self-consciousness that I didn't experience the benefit of what singing is, which is like a vibration in the body.
Yeah.
So such a bummer that for such a long time that was sort of my experience of it. And that's the sort of troubling thing when things become outcome focused. And I don't have any problem with outcome focused, because I think we need that. We need the goal orientation, but we don't need it as much as we have it. We need the whole brain involved.
Yeah.
And what's been joyful about doing this show is I'm just having so much fun, and I'm playing, and I'm not self-conscious, and I'm not worried. And ironically, the song that I sing is called Perfect. About being
which princess
perfect.
are you? What are you?
I'm Sleeping Beauty. Which is also ironic, as I have a young child that hasn't slept much in her lifetime.
Insomniac beauty.
Yeah. So it's so much fun to play.
What's the basic thrust of the song Perfect?
I'm perfect just the way that I am.
Okay.
Yeah. What's not to love about me? It's really and because it's a conversation with Snow White. So my co-hosts Snow White and Cinderella, you were in a bit of a tussle because I keep falling asleep. And so they try to put me on stage and I keep falling asleep. And the tussle is that, I'm not following Snow White's regime.
Okay.
And and I'm not doing the perfect princess song. So it's all about like, I'm perfect just the way that I am. Just like this, with my freckles and my falling asleep on the throne and on the floor. And it's lovely. It's such a lovely, fitting song. And it makes me always think of I'm often thinking of Marion Woodman's book Addiction to Perfection and thinking how funny that this is almost full circle. That book that I think really did change my life, reading that book. In fact, that was part of what fed into why I began a creative practice. So it was me trying to find a creative response to an eating disorder. So that like every time I felt this sensation to binge or purge, it was like, let's do something creative. How will that work? And I remember reading in that book, or maybe it was something else that she said, that when you're looking for that sweetness in the fridge, what kind of sweetness are you really looking for?
Yeah.
And so that was a really good prompt that I held. What kind of like sweetness or what kind of satisfaction or what kind of satiety was I seeking? And that's, I guess, how I found that, wow, the creative expression was giving me that thing that I was longing for, the satiety that I didn't even realize I needed.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, I mean, I wonder also about addiction in this house and as being another, because I'm always, as I'm entering these houses, looking for those deeper layers. And it is that, right? Like, I love the Jungian take on addiction, right? Like the idea that what we're reaching for, if we could reach through that and then we can go through that and to reach for what we're really wanting, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with what we're wanting, as per Sleeping Beauty's song. It's perfect, actually. But because I can't see the perfection of it, because I can't see what's really trying to happen, I reach for that thing that's a pale substitution and actually is making me sick. And back to that thing about the culture keeps selling us things that are making us sick, which is so compelling because they're so good at that. Like the marketing engine is so good at that. So it's all these extra sort of layers that get in between us and what we're really desiring.
Yeah. And there's that selling to consume. And then there's also the absence of, again, this is what I found going into this work, going into the work of the body and body dreaming was that we also, in company and in community, we haven't learnt how to sort of be curious, to pull out what's within the people that we're around. We're almost waiting for our moment to speak. It's not that deep listening. It's not the like, wow, tell me more. Like even with the kids, tell me more. What is it? Like when my girls come out and they've had a dream, I'm so happy I know what I know. And I'm really wanting to know and hear their dream or what they have to say. And that simple delight and desire to connect with what's emerging from within them, like that is the deep. That's where we feel like delighted with, and that's that deep, satiating connection and pleasure that we don't have time for. We're not even aware that that's what's missing. And in our hurry to kind of get out the door or get on with life, which it's systemic. It's not just the individual.
Yeah.
It's part of what the way that the world is, many cultures are designed at the moment. We we're being sold to consume the things outside of us in order to meet that appetite. Yeah.
Yeah, we're in a great rush. And maybe the word rush with the hush kind of thing in it has a little hint for us to sort of like, hey, slow down here. Even if you can't slow down, right, because the demands of your life are as they are, there's still kind of like a place inside that you can hush or come back or be in the rush, right? There's a difference, but it's not about the massive changes to be made, although you have and I have in my life in different times, right? But because that's also an important level of it. But the being able to slow down and appreciate what's actually happening opens the door to this house in a way. That movement opens the door to it and approaches to time. And I feel chronos and the chronology and time being so linear, or appearing to be so linear, and how we get swallowed in that time, and we can lose time by that consumption, by being consumed by time on the clock time, and lose kairos as Michael Meade talks about, and the emergent moment that is always there wanting to happen, but can find it difficult to happen if we're not, it's impossible to happen in a sense if we're not attuned to it, or we're not dropping into it, or having some way to move through the body into it, and thus moving through the realm of pleasure, as you're saying, through the realm of embodiment and body dreaming, and into our actual life force. Just speaking of time, though, I'm realizing that we are coming to the end of our time, which saddens me because I want to keep going. But that's my insatiable greed for talking to you, Vive.
Round 2. We'll have a round 2.
We will have a round 2. And speaking of that, I'm actually going to be in Vive's summit, which I'm really looking forward to. We'll be having that conversation soon. So before we close out and say goodbye, Vive, can you tell us a bit about, like, if people are really interested in this summit, what's their next steps in, like, getting on board?
That's a great question. Soon there will be a website up for people to register, and you can register for free and watch all of the interviews live as they're appearing. They'll go over 5 days from October 6 to October 10. And that will open late September. But in the meantime, you can always jump onto viveandco.com and register and for my mailing list, and then you'll receive notification that the summit is coming up. Okay. But I'll be leaving little breadcrumbs as I go over the next couple of months as I'm conducting the interviews too. Okay, amazing. Well, thank you. I'm really looking forward to it and being part of it, and you've got some great speakers on there. So really stoked for that. But thank you so much for your generosity of your spirit and your time today. And, I can really feel your name is Vive, right? Like Geneviève, you are, it's the life force. And I think that everything has pointed to this in your life, really. Everything that you've been involved in your world comes back to this place. And it's so good for me as your friend also to see you following the calling more deeply, because this does feel like your arena. So thank you for sharing so openly with me and my audience, and we all thank you for coming on the show and being with us today. It's such a pleasure. And I will say thank you to Granny, who stuttered and couldn't say Genevieve, so she called me Vive since I was the littlest little girl. And I think, there's a little twinkle in her eye when she was doing it. Yeah, thanks, Grandma. Amazing. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you for listening to On the Soul's Terms podcast. To support the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review, sharing with friends, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/onthesoulsterms. Until next time.